ladies and gentlemen, I am OmnusI, here with you once more for another RPGaDay video. Today, the topic is the 25th, since it is the 25th of August, and the actual topic word is lever. Levers are interesting things, aren't they? Now, of course, there's two different variations of lever, slight variations. One lever being the primitive mechanical device of using a fulcrum, an immobile object, and leveraging on the larger side to put disproportionate force on the smaller side to lift, raise, or maneuver something. Which by itself is a fascinating concept and can be very, very useful in gaming, understanding basic mechanical principles. For instance, if you have a portcullis, if you are able to use a lever and fulcrum, you might be able to create enough of a gap underneath a portcullis, normally unable to be lifted by your adventurers. If you manage to effectively use a lever, you might be able to raise it up enough that a slender person might be able to get through. Certainly a possible thing with the right gear or perhaps the right magical items, and ultimately in many games the urge to get cooler and cooler equipment and getting greater and greater abilities and things seems to preclude using your basic things that you've sometimes just left behind in your considerations and just thinking of clever ways of using them to overcome situations. For instance, the humble 10-foot pole used to be stock adventuring gear for primarily one purpose: to poke the ground ahead of you so that if there was any traps or tripwires or anything like that, you could spring them while you yourself were safe. Worked very well for that purpose, but that wasn't the only thing that they were useful for. Likewise, using that very same principle, perhaps even with a 10-foot pole, although generally a wooden pole would be, it's really not going to be strong enough to use for a lot of things for leverage. Maybe a couple of them lashed together or something like that, but you get the idea. But the aspect of the word lever I'd like to talk about is a lever, which is a device that is sticking out of something, and it usually has multiple positions that it can be in, and the idea that changing its position will trigger something. A mechanical device, something magical, one never knows. And often, when adventurers, a group of heroes, find such a lever, the temptation to pull or push that lever up or down is heavy. Very strong temptation, because you want to see what happens. Generally, something like that isn't there without a good purpose. And the urge to play around with it is, for some people, overwhelming. There are plenty of players who could not let a lever standing in the middle of a corridor with no hint to its purpose go unflipped. They're just inherently too curious. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Curiosity is a great spur for adventure. But, and there's a but there, of course, a cautious person will realize that there's as many bad things that can go wrong as potential good things. So unless you're in a desperate state, a cautious person wouldn't just flip a lever. Now, of course, the lever usually feeds into other mechanical devices and or magical. But primarily, it is like a large red button. That's what a lever looks like. It is a choice. Do you activate the lever or do you not? And I think in many cases, especially in terms of game design, if you have a lever, something for somebody to use or not use, the temptation to stick it right in front of people is pretty darn strong. For instance, in Dungeons & Dragons, the 20-sided die is probably the most recognizable lever for Dungeons & Dragons. Since not everybody uses miniatures, which are very cool, but that 20-sided die looks cool. Some people might not be as impressed with them, but I always thought the concept of a 20-sided die, it's just awesome. It represents the even possibility of all these different numbers possibly coming up, and you can use it to resolve so many different things. So, in a way, that is the lever of Dungeons & Dragons. Take this die and roll it and see what cool thing might happen. It's pretty good. It's pretty good, quite honestly. And lots of games have their concepts for what is the thing that will attract you. I made a video about a game called, Everway? It's a storytelling game. And basically it has a bunch of cards, similar to tarot cards a little bit. And those cards are used to resolve possible things that might happen in the course of the game. And they're also used as a spur to kind of drive the action of the story. They're both used for resolution as well as for helping the game master to continue to tell the story and interweave actions and events. It's pretty cool, actually. It's very, very attractive as a lever to spur you to use these. If you're playing this game, you want to use those cards. You want to do things with them. And by virtue of doing so, you play around with the lever. Play around with the cool thing that makes this game special. Now, in my case, I'm kind of looking at it a different way. Dice are the attractive things of Dicefile, but it's not just a die. For instance, again, Dungeons & Dragons, the 20-sided die is the iconic die of the Dungeons & Dragons system. As a matter of fact, back in 3rd edition, they just abbreviated it as the D20 system for a lot of things that came off of the core concept that Dungeons & Dragons went to. Roll 20-sided die, add some numbers, see if it hits a target number. Bog standard, simple stuff. It seems so now, at least. It took them a while to get to that point. But when you're looking at mine, it isn't a die that is the attractant. It is, again, understanding, what people want to play with, is having this dashboard of your character sheet and wanting to take those dice and move them and roll them and manipulate the world around you using these dice as a representation of what your character's force of will, skill, and the things that you use, all of them summed up in these dice. And anytime you want to resolve something that's in question, you take the correct dice and you get to roll them. And you get to roll dice a lot in this game if you want. And personally, I think that is the lever that makes my game visually appealing. If you look at a character sheet and it's got these dice on it and you realize that those dice being here mean something, dice being there means something, you can look at my character sheet and instantly tell how much danger a character is in, where they are in a combat phase. You just look how well equipped they are. You see the die that represents their gear dice. All of those things on this very visual medium is the attractant that I hope to use, that people will look at the game and they will want to play it based on those principles. Now, if you strip it down, you get rid of the character sheet and you just tally up the dice that you have available and you only have one of each kind and you roll those, it takes away a good deal of the visual appeal. It does. Mechanically, it still works, but quite honestly, I do believe that seeing it in action, having the space to play it as I intended it, as I designed it, I think is the best, and that will certainly attract people. Just like you can play Dungeons & Dragons without a single die in your hand. You can get a dice roller on a phone or something. But it's not the same. If you're used to rolling dice and you get a dice roller, it doesn't feel just the same. It does the job, certainly. Yeah, it does. But it doesn't feel like slinging a die at a clutch situation and watching that with anticipation on how that die is going to finish rolling. That's something different. And it's something that I, greatly enjoy. The possibility of opening up chance and randomness to what you're doing to see if you succeed. Do you or don't you? Gaming has some elements that just can't be simulated easily. All games have something to them. Role-playing games have oftentimes that. Some element where random chance comes down. And even though you can stack the odds, all it takes the die to come up in the one face that might sink you, and that happens. Or that, even though the odds are long, if it comes up in that right face, it saves you. It's, it's quite a kick. So, thinking about the lever, what really makes your game appealing? What is the thing that might draw somebody to your game? I know a lot of games are kind of muddled. They don't have a clear-cut thing. Or at least, it may not be as obvious. Now, for example, Shadowrun, you look at the character sheet, it's kind of a mess. You look at the dice, and it's some six-sided dice. Nothing flashy, nothing fancy. The lever for Shadowrun is the world. It's the world they've built and the lore behind it and all the cool things that you can do within it. Because there's something for everybody. If you love fantasy and magic, it's got that. If you love high tech, it's got that. If you like cyberware and getting all chromed, yeah, you got that too. It's a little bit of everything, which is cool, I think. And that's the lever for that. If you don't think that world is interesting, you're probably not going to skin Shadowrun for much else other than its lore. Let's face it, some of those systems kind of get messy when they're worked together. I've never yet had a game where magic and the running the Matrix and hardcore combat and all that really worked seamlessly together. There's usually some disconnect in that. Other games like GURPS do it better with an integrated system, but the world is so good. And honestly, there are some good elements to Shadowrun. I'm not going to say that the mechanics aren't good. They've evolved, certainly, and generally I find for the better, but it's the world. That's the lever. If you don't love the idea of the near future, Seattle, and all the other places that you can go in the Awakened world, well, Shadowrun's probably not going to be for you. The lever doesn't fit your hand. Okay, that's fine. Not every game is everybody's cup of tea. Clearly, there's plenty of room for lots of games. But my lever, I hope, the thing that gets me excited, I don't know if it'll get other people excited, but I hope so, is the simple idea that the game is so organic and allows you to tinker with so many different things and make choices on how your character is going to do things, again, in the mindset of the character and how much effort you want to put into things. So that's my take on lever for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, and, if you did, make sure you come back. Still got a couple more days left of August. So until we're all done with this, thank you for joining me for RPGaDay. And I am OmnusI, here in my lair. Until next time, thank you and farewell.